Hey friends, it's Davey Blackburn, and I have something special that I want to invite you to be a part of. On Thursday, August 1st, we are hosting the Nothing is Wasted book launch event. And we want you to come and join us as we celebrate what God has done and is continuing to do through Amanda's life and legacy. And as we take a closer look at God's story of redemption in the midst of devastating pain, and we launch this book into the world. We have an incredible night planned for you with some very special guests. Our dear friends Daniel and Brittany Brooker will be joining Christy and me for a live podcast recording. I don't want to give away too many details right now, but I promise you, you're not going to want to miss anything that we have planned for this night. Make plans to join us here in Indianapolis for this special night. So save the date right now. Mark it on your calendars. Get ready, Thursday, August 1st. You have been a part of my journey for so many years, and I'm so excited to share this next part of the story with you. So mark your calendars and make plans to join us for an unforgettable night as we launch this book into the world and share more of Amanda's life and legacy. I know you'll find that in your own story, God will not waste your pain, and this night is going to be pivotal in your perspective shift of that. You can go to nothingiswastedbook.com to find out more about this special event and to get your tickets when they come available in a couple of weeks.
Well, hello, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Davey Blackburn. Joining me, our other host, Aubrey Sampson. Aubrey, so great to have you.
Oh, so great to be here.
No, I say so great to have you strategically because we actually had you for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. It was so fun.
This is a Inception moment where
I know.
I am in the middle of my own episode.
What would have been even more amazing is if we had been able to figure out how to get you to interview you.
That would have been incredible. Like Avatar Aubrey or AI Aubrey. Let's do that.
That's what I was going to say. With AI technology now, we probably could have figured that out. And that would have been...
We failed. We failed
quite disorienting for people. Oh, my goodness. Well, we do. I get to interview you today. And we talk a little bit about The Dark Night of the Soul. You're working on a book project right now where that's a major emphasis for you. Yep. That's going to be released early 2025. I'm excited about that.
I know. I can't believe it. So excited about that, too.
And, in this conversation, we talk quite a bit about some of the new season of grief that you've experienced with the loss of your best friend, Jenn. And it's beautiful, the conversation that we had. And it's also very tender. Tender.
Yeah, it's a tender one. It's one of the first times I'm talking about the loss of my best friend Jenn in length. So I appreciate you creating space for that, Davey, and hopefully it encourages. We haven't really talked much about best friend loss on Nothing is Wasted. It's kind of every category of grief has its own obviously unique space, but I'm not glad. How do you say it? I'm grateful that
that's good.
Nothing is wasted. Maybe that's it,
Yeah, and I think it's really important that our community hears from you, and me, anybody who we're voices, we're kind of helping to lead this effort. We're definitely not experts in this, but hopefully what people get is a glimpse into the fact that in real time, you're wrestling with the same things they're wrestling through.
Yeah, that's it.
And I'm wrestling with the same things they're wrestling through.
Right.
And we're just trying to provide that space where people can wrestle. And I think that's what really comes through in this conversation that we have together. I am grateful that our listeners get to have a window into it. Before we dive into the conversation I have with you, I want to remind everybody that Nothing is Wasted. The book is available for pre-order. You can pre-order it now. And at the time of this release, we have already had our first launch team book club. It was incredible, an unbelievable time spending with those of you guys who are on the launch team. But it's not too late. It's not too late. Right. You can get in. We have 3 more book clubs over the course of the summer with the launch team. We would love for you to come and be a part of that book club. Help us to steward the message of Nothing is Wasted, to get the word out there by joining the launch team. And so you can go to nothingiswastedbook.com to do that. And Aubrey, so excited about August 1st.
I cannot wait. There's a countdown on my calendar, book launch event in Indiana.
The details have all come together. We're super excited. It's amazing what God's been doing through it and what he's going to do through it. I'm excited about the night. And so we want to have you here live. So you can, again, go to nothingiswastedbook.com, find out the information about the book launch event. Come here, purchase your ticket. be a part of this incredible night as we celebrate Amanda's legacy, her story, and how her story has impacted all of our stories.
That's right.
And then we get to celebrate mostly the person who redeems all of our stories, and that's Jesus. It's going to be an incredible night. We're so excited.
Be so good.
So excited. Aubrey, let's dive into this conversation. I can't wait for them to hear from you on this. Well, Aubrey Sampson, it is so good to have you joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast.
This is fun to be here as a guest, Davey. Wow.
I see that for every single interview. I'm like, oh, so-and-so. Great to have you joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. And it just felt appropriate to say that even in this moment.
I'm curious about I'm pulling the veil back on the podcast a little bit, but I'm curious about future us recording the intros and outros for this episode. What we'll say about ourselves. So this is kind of fun.
I thought about the same thing.
Thanks for having me, Davey.
This is a different format right now. Normally, very rarely do I interview you or you interview me. There are specific occasions where that takes place. This is one such occasion, and it's for a very important reason. The last time our audience, our community heard from you as an interviewee was episode 75.
Whoa.
A long time ago. That was before you were the host of the Nothing is Wasted podcast alongside of me. And it was actually the first time as I heard you talk about your story that I was like, wow, she would be an incredible co-host for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. And it was shortly after that.
Look at what God did.
And we had a competition, so to speak, or a trial run, a interview, if you will.
Yes.
On site, on action interview. And now you are the host alongside of me with Nothing is Wasted podcast. But now we're talking about some stuff that's been going on in your life recently. Because in that episode 75, you share with us some seasons of grief that you had gone through. Some things that you had learned and written out of that season of grief, particularly your book, The Louder Song, which is an incredible book. And there's so many of our community. You've already read this book. If you haven't, you definitely have to pick it up. It's on lament specifically. I don't think as you wrote this book that you would or could foresee the kind of lament and grief that you would walk through.
Definitely
in the future. And that's what we want to talk about now, because you've walked through a new season of grief. And okay, but before we talk about that, Aubrey, give us just a little bit of an update. We have to do this as a formality, right? Just give us an update on your life in case people
don't know me or whatever. No, that's great. Yeah, no, I love that question. Well, my name is Aubrey Sampson. If you're new to the podcast, I am the co-host of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I do wear a number of other hats. I'm a wife of 23 years to my husband, Kevin. We lead a church together called Renewal Church in West Chicago, a little multi-ethnic, beautiful congregation that we love deeply. We've got 3 sons, and they're old, Davey. They are 17, 14, and almost 13. So that's just wild. Man. We are just in a totally different we're in a great
about to have a
season
kid
of life.
That's starting college.
I can't even. You're gonna have to have me on for that episode when I'm grieving my firstborn leaving the nest. Oh. I know it'll be good. I know it's the right thing, but I want my babies home. So anyway, we lead a church. I serve as teaching pastor. We're church planters, and then I do a number of things. I write books. Davey mentioned one of my books, The Louder Song, and kind of just with some of that book writing is speaking and traveling and doing some pulpit fill around. And I'm so grateful to be a part of Nothing is Wasted. I love this ministry. I love what God is doing, bringing hope to the hurting. And I also coach with Propel Ecclesia. I've been involved with Propel Women, which is Chris Kane's ministry, for a very long time. And get to coach women in ministry marketplace leadership. So that's really fun too.
Which, by the way, Aubrey is an unbelievable preacher. So if you're you're a pastor, you're a ministry leader, you're somebody who is looking for someone to come in, especially like this. The thing is I feel like it's, well, you work more with women in ministry and women preaching. And I know that's something that you're really passionate about, especially as women communications. But It's probably because there's so many, and we don't need to get off on this rabbit trail, but there's so many spaces that aren't really open to it that it feels like there is a lack of great women preachers. There isn't really. They just seem to be under the radar. And so I want people to understand, like, if you're looking for someone to come in and communicate, whether it be for a Sunday morning to your entire congregation, to whatever event you're doing, or for a conference or women's event or whatever it is, you've got to have Aubrey in. She's unbelievable. Aubrey, I was looking at, I was just watching some of the Instagram stuff you've been putting up. And I'm like, my goodness, you are so anointed. And
praise Jesus.
It's amazing. I've heard some incredible communicators, and you're up there. Like, really is powerful.
So, I really love doing it. So thanks for saying that. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, listen, we, it was not too long ago. It seems like that you came to us and you shared some heartbreaking news with our community. And a lot of people have been wondering how you're doing. I would love for you to just walk us a little bit on the journey fill us in on some of this journey of this new season of grief that you've been in. And then I want to dive into how you're processing some of this.
Man, I'm going to have to do my best to keep it together. I know we can be real here at Nothing is Wasted, but I need to be able to form coherent sentences. We'll air this later, but today is something called Galentine's Day, which not everybody knows. It's sort of this like pseudo holiday from Parks and Rec, which is like the day before Valentine's Day, you celebrate your girlfriends. And my best friend Jenn loved Galentine's Day and would very intentionally give gifts to the single moms in our church or in her life, really aware of them this time of year. She'd bake cookies and bring them presents. And so Galentine's Day today, I love that I get to talk about her. I love that I get to remember her legacy. And that leads us to what we're talking about. My very best friend of over 25 years, man. Started in ministry with her. She died of breast cancer a little over a year ago now. It was December 2022.
Yeah.
Time is weird, right? Grief time is weird. Right. And her and her husband Justin have been our best friends forever. They have 3 sons as well. And, just having walked with her through her breast cancer journey over 2 years, I'm laughing when I say that because Jenn actually thought the phrase breast cancer journey was really cringy. Mm-hmm. So she would hate that I said that right now. But walking with her and seeing her decline and then being with her near her the final hours of her death, it's been a lot to process. Mm-hmm. Whew. And man, Davey, I'm better than I was as far as just like how acute and how raw the initial that first year, as our listeners know, is just, there's nothing like it. I don't think there's anything like it. And yet you just asked me one question and I'm all of a sudden crying, you know what I mean? So it's very fresh. I know for all of our listeners, even grief 20 years ago, you bring it up at the right time, the right way, it comes right back. So that's kind of, I think, what we're here to talk about today is what it means to lose a best friend. Because I've had loss in my life, as we've mentioned before. And you can't really compare grief, but certainly this is a different experience of a singular experience of grief.
It is. Yeah, it really is. That it's a unique experience because Jenn was a best friend for so long, and it's very rare to find in life in general, to find friendship and companionship the way that you had with Jenn. Yeah. I've got a best friend that I think about, Kenneth Wagner, and we were best friends. We've been best friends since we were 18 years old. So we just crossed over, and he observed this the other day. We just crossed over knowing each other now longer than we didn't know.
Longer. Yeah. I love that. I love that.
All the time in with that person. Investment, the shared experiences, the highs, the lows, the ups, the downs, the everything. And she knew you sometimes better than you knew you, and vice versa.
Yes.
And talk about just how unique this kind of because, you know, this isn't like a loved one in the sense of a, you know, an actual sister or a spouse or a, you know, child, and yet sometimes it can feel like even heavier than that because it feels like she was a sister closer than a sister, even, you know, and so talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we all know those of us who have the gift of a best friend is there's shared language, there's shared memory, there's shared inside jokes, there's sort of understanding what the other person means and is saying and isn't saying without them saying it. There's like that one glance and you sort of know that one glance across the room at a church event or something, and you know what they're thinking and they know what you're thinking. And that's the stuff that's really difficult to quantify. And I have a sister. I love my sister, but even hopefully my sister won't hear this. Even sisters, there's depth of relationship and friendship, and there's that blood connection, but there's conflict, right? And there's some competition, and there's some weird sister energy, sibling energy that just doesn't exist in a healthy best friendship, right? It is like, not that there's never challenging each other or calling each other out, but there just isn't any, like, there's no weirdness that Jenn and I ever had to work through. There's no, even after her passing, there's nothing that I regret or wish we could have processed. Like, it was just good for each otherness, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, I mean, it's so wild. I was at my first job in ministry. I was a junior high youth pastor, and I had a volunteer meeting, and Jenn walked into that volunteer meeting. She didn't even go to our church at the time, but her parents went, and she was back from college looking to get involved. It was before she was even engaged to Justin, but they were dating. And I just we both laugh about this. Like, we both kind of size each other up, and we're like, "Oh, she's cute. Oh, she's cute. Oh, we could be friends." And like, from that point on, she volunteered in my ministry. She actually ended up getting hired at the church as well. And so we've just have done ministry together for 20 years. She and Justin were crucial in our planting Renewal Church over 8 years ago. And these are I read Joan Didion has a memoir on grief. About she's a writer. She lost her husband, who was also a writer, just like out of nowhere. Like, I think it was a brain aneurysm at dinner, gone. I'll have to look up the title of the book later. But she said our days were filled with each other's voices. And I think that's the thing about, you know, especially girlfriends. Like, Jenn and I were just constantly on this app called Voxer, which is like a walkie-talkie app, like all day long, talking to each other or calling each other or DMing each other. Like, I feel like adult best friendship is like, we're emailing, texting, calling, DMing, voice, you know, all at the same time. And so the absence of that, I think that was so shocking. Even Kevin was like, man, I miss hearing Jenn's voice in our house, because I would wake up and there'd be a voice message from Jenn, you know, or like we would do things like send each other pictures of how crazy our hair looked every morning and how terrible we looked without makeup, just for fun. You know what I mean? And so those are the kinds of things that, like, until they're absent, you don't realize how much a person was in your life. Even like something that shocked me this year was when our kids got school pictures. Jenn and I would always share each other's kids' school pictures, even if they were like terrible, hilarious school pictures. We'd be like, "Are you kidding? Look at my kid's smile," you know? And those, you know, you kind of don't know how interwoven a friend is in your life until they're no longer interwoven in your life. Right. And so those layers of just grief and awareness of their lack of presence, that's been shocking over the past year. Like, wow, we had really integrated in a healthy way, like not in a codependent way, in a very healthy way. We had integrated our lives together. We did ministry together. Our husbands are best friends. Like, our kids are best friends. Like, wow, our lives were intertwined. And so to have that gone is quite a gap.
You know, there's, I just being a part of the journey a little bit, you know, and obviously every Wednesday seeing the Warrior Wednesday posts that you guys would put up, and I know there was a time in your journey as Jenn was battling cancer, that you were extremely hopeful, that you were like, oh, God's got this. She's going to be cured of this. She's going to be healed of this. And then I don't remember exactly when it was, but I do remember at one point, you were going away to do a kind of a girls getaway. And you communicated to me in this way, this may be the last time that we all get together with Jenn. And it was like there was a shift that happened.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can, because there's so many, especially when it comes to cancer, man, it seems so prevalent now. We lead these widower retreats. Justin was at the last widower retreat, and it's like story after story after story after story. I was hearing these battles with cancer, and in Christian world, there's this faith-filled hope that says, no, God's going to heal. And, and some of it is a mixture of like, I can't believe that there's no way that this could actually happen. So I know God's got to heal. I remember feeling some of that in my own story a little bit, but like, talk to me a little bit about that journey of feeling hopeful and then feeling, kind of that hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. And then the final realization of like, no, not like God didn't heal in the way that I wanted him to.
Yeah, Warrior Wednesday, Jenn had her chemo on Wednesday, so we would all dress up in camo, like all her supporters, and share pictures and send them to her and just hashtag Warrior Wednesday, just kind of solidarity,
Right.
And we prayed for eradication the whole time. So it's interesting, Jenn's journey. Jenn had a journey in life. And before she passed, she gave me permission to share these stories. So I feel like I can, even though they're not my stories. But there are all these like two paths, and they ended in redemption. So let me give you an example. When Jenn had a son named Hudson, who died after 36 hours of life. Jenn was on hospice for a month, and he just didn't get enough fluid in his lungs. And so he was born a bit early, but ultimately just couldn't make it. And it was devastating to walk. I mean, poor Justin, man, that guy has known grief. But so she lost Hudson very, very tragically. And about a year later, my son Nolan, who I was unexpectedly pregnant with and actually discovered I was pregnant while Jenn was on hospice, my son Nolan was born in the same room where she gave birth to Hudson, and he died. There was a place in Florida that Jenn and Justin often visited. They went there one time to kind of ritualize or ceremonialize their grief of Hudson, like officially say goodbye. Wow. The following year, they were there again, and she found out she was pregnant with her next son unexpectedly. Wow. So and there were lots of themes like that in Jenn's life, where something would happen, it would end sadly, devastatingly, but then like almost a year later, God would kind of do this weird, redemptive, miraculous thing just to say, like, I'm still here. Wow. And so with cancer, Jenn was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and about a year later, she was actually cancer-free, diagnosed as cancer-free. And so we're all celebrating. Oh, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Well, just a few months later, she went for a checkup, and the cancer was back and had actually morphed and spread everywhere. At that point, it was stage 4. But the whole time, you're talking about us clinging to hope, Jenn and I kept saying to each other, but this is that thing God does in your life, right? Where it ends poorly, it ends terribly, but there's redemption, there's redemption. So I think there was this hope, because the theme of her life had always been that full circle, that this surely would end in redemption, that this surely would end in healing. This is just going to be another one of those stories. So as Jenn began to decline, and it was very clear that just like chemo wasn't working, her lungs were not working. I mean, we don't need to go into all of that, but she and I talked about that it was actually on her hospice bed, and she was like, Aubrey, I thought this was going to be the redemption. And I
And I just said, babe, but like, this is the actual redemption. You get to see Jesus face to face. You are healed and you are whole. That's the miracle, you know? And I do believe that. And I know Jenn believed that. I know Justin believes that. I am saying that with tears in my eyes because, of course, we longed for the redemption to be on earth, right? As so many of us do. We long for the healing to happen on earth. I would also say, Davey, like, you know, many people talk theologically about this concept of already, not yet, this already, the kingdom is coming, Jesus is overcome, but we're in that not yet season waiting for him to return and for all things to be made new. I was always praying for eradication and healing from cancer. Like, I just think we're told to pray for healing. Let's do it. But and Justin knows this now, I kept this a secret for a long time. I had a sense, and I believe it was a sense from God. In fact, I know it was from God, that Jenn would pass away before Christmas last year. Like, God whispered it to me. I knew it. And so I had been holding on to hope and holding on to healing and holding on to prayers of eradication, while also knowing this still small voice in my head had told me she was going to pass away before Christmas of 2022. And so when she went on hospice just basically 2 weeks before Christmas and then ended up passing away on the 21st of December, there was this part of me that was like, you know, you're so devastated, but also, you know, God went before. And so that's a weird, I know you've experienced even some of that before Amanda's death. There's a weirdness in, like, if God went before and God whispered that means God knew, that means God didn't stop it, right? Like, you could go into all these weird theological debates in your mind. And yet then you also have to believe God's hand is in it. And for some reason, God's at work in that. And God's goodness and God's love is in that. And that's the wrestle. I mean, ultimately you asked, I've lost track of what you asked me, but
that's great. That's exactly right. There's such a wrestling with grief that, you know, sometimes the way that I explain it is we ask those why questions where we're trying to get some kind of a rational explanation from God, because we think so linearly as human beings. You know, not counting sometimes the fact that God's ways are so much higher than our ways. Even just the sheer fact that he's outside of time, right?
Yes.
And so he's not confined by that restriction of time. So it doesn't just, there's nothing linear necessarily with God.
Right.
But we still ask these why questions as if it was like cause and effect on some level. And we're asking God for an explanation. And I think, you know, God's gracious in that in those things, as we're asking, he meets us there, but he doesn't often give us explanation. He gives us something greater, and that's incarnation. That's him. That's his presence in the midst of suffering. That cause that, like, it really provokes, I think, in us this like maybe acceptance. You know, on some stage, you and then you embrace it, the sovereignty of God and his hand, and going, it's a mystery. I don't know where your hand is in all of this, but I do trust that it is.
Yeah. I honestly, and I may have said this to you before, Davey, but I honestly feel like it's faith. Like, I'm like, oh wait, this is faith.
Yeah.
This is faith.
That's exactly right.
Like I'm choosing to believe that God's promises are true. I'm choosing to believe that somehow God is at work, even in this horrific situation, here with me, here with Justin, here with the boys, making all things new, even when I want it to be another way. And I'm like, oh wait, this is the actual ask. Like, this is what it means to follow Christ.
It's like, you know, it's almost like we typically think that God looks at our pleads, you know, for healing and our belief and trust that he can heal. And he goes, yep, that's faith right there. There's evidence of faith. They really believe. And so I'm going to, without faith, it's impossible to please God. I'm going to grant that because they demonstrated enough faith.
They really had enough
a lot of faith there. And the reality is faith is best evidenced when everything that we see and everything that we experience seems contrary to who we know God is.
Yeah.
And yet we still trust in the loving kindness and all power of God.
Yep. Yeah. I've been thinking, especially over the past few months, about where Romans talks about Abraham, like even there was no reason to hope, he still had
True.
hope. And obviously it's about God granting us the faith. That's not necessarily like the faith of Abraham, but still there's something about that. Like even when he could not see any reason to have hope, he chose hope.
Wow.
He believed God's words were true.
Wow.
And that's the ask for us, especially in grief and heartache, I think.
Aubrey, we had at the beginning of this year, we had an episode where, me, you, Eric, we all kind of in a round table talked about some stuff. Episode 305, it was called The Continual Journey Toward Healing. We mentioned, this a little bit. This is where you started to talk a little bit about where you're at with some stuff, but we didn't get into as much detail as what we're getting into right now. But one of the things you said is that it's been really difficult to lose the person that you would have processed this kind of pain with.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can share with us a little bit more about how the fact, that fact has now colored or changed the way that you're processing through this grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is certainly a pain point. Because again, like I said, we were just in each other's lives all the time. So I was about to say our audience will think I'm crazy, but I actually think our audience will get this more than anybody else. Like I still leave Jenn messages on our Voxer thread,
Listen,
because I need to talk to her.
I did that for months with Amanda. And then finally I did a final text to her at one point and just said, hey, this can be my last one,
Yeah.
But there was something about it's that, what it is? C.S. Lewis talks about it in A Grief Observed, but it is basically that phantom appendage syndrome that happens.
Totally.
Where you still feel like, if you get your arm cut off, you still feel like it's there.
Yes. It is a bizarre thing to think like the person is gone, but like this relationship was still active and thriving. Yeah. Like it wasn't like I hadn't talked to her. She wasn't estranged. Right. And so that to have that, I mean, that nerve thing is interesting to me to think about how it takes nerves a while to kind of die. Right. Like it makes sense that you need to continue that part of the relationship for a while. And, I'm so in my head theologically sometimes too, even though I'm a big feeler. So I'm like, is this okay, Jesus? I'm not praying to her. I want you to know. I'm just, but I just think there's grace for it all. Sure, right.
For sure.
But I do remember going on a girls' trip. I guess it was last summer. And Jenn and I had done so many girls' trips. I have so many videos of us on a plane together, getting off a plane together, laughing on a plane together. And I had this moment where I was getting off of the tarmac, I guess is what it's called, that walkway. And this is going to sound a little strange, but I said out loud, "You cannot come with me." And it was this moment where I just remember like, I need to go on a girls' trip without Jenn, which of course I was going on a girls' trip without Jenn. Like practically she's in heaven with Jesus. I'm going on a girls' trip. She's not there. But it was like, I mentally needed to be like, I have to move forward. I have to live my life. I have to have more girls' trips. I have to invest in new friendships and new women. And, God has surrounded me with beautiful friends during this season. And that means in one weird sense, like I had to decide, Jenn, you can't go with me. Like I can't sit here and grieve this whole girls' trip and wish you were here, or I will not enjoy the life that's in front of me. And I know Jenn would want me to enjoy the life that's in front of me. And that was a weird, it almost felt like, am I betraying her? Is this a weird? No, this is the right thing to do, to make a choice to live the life that's in front of me. It doesn't mean I don't miss her and honor her and love her. But I have to choose life. I have to choose relationship. I have to choose to keep going on girls' trips, or else I'm going to like fade away into obscurity. And I mean, I know my husband wouldn't let me, and that's a little bit dramatic, but I mean that. Like I won't open my heart again to other girlfriends. And so that's been an interesting process to like, okay, I'm going to carefully let this person into my life and start being a little vulnerable with them. And it's that we all know these people aren't replacements for the one you lost, but it does even feel a little bit scary to like open up to new friendships again. And and then I would say I've also been more cautious to like, no, not everybody is gonna get all of me. Like there's something about, I think, just the kind of the pain and the special loss of a best friend that makes me go, no, I'm gonna reserve my vulnerability in my heart for people I really trust, not just for everybody.
That's interesting, Aubrey. I bet that could be a slippery slope or a danger. I hadn't thought about that, even prescriptively for people, that when you lose that part of your life, now you could be susceptible to, because it almost feels like it's kind of dammed up inside of you now, that you're like, oh, once I start to find it just comes out to anybody. I open myself up to anybody because I am hurting so bad. I want so badly for that,
to be filled, fill it.
Relationship to be in my life again. And man, I hadn't thought about that. But I think that's a really good, almost cautionary statement for people.
Well, and too, how when you walk through grief, like your give a darn gets broken.
Right.
Adults might say that a different way.
I was going to say, when your give a darn is broken, you say it
differently. you actually say it differently. I'm trying to keep it G-rated for our audience here. I think in one sense that does allow you to be like, no, you're not a person in my life right now. No, we're not going to. And that sounds weird and kind of callous, but I actually think you're right. Like, the temptation would be like to spill and bleed all over everybody that comes around. And I think to just go, no, my heart deserves a little preserving. I deserve to be a little contained and to only give away pieces to people who are really trustworthy. And anyway, what did you ask me? I keep forgetting what you asked me, Dave.
You're moving in the right direction. You're talking about what I've asked you, but this is part of grief too, isn't it? Where we start to process this stuff out, and there's not necessarily a direct destination or a point of, we're not trying to make a point. We're just trying to, that's what I love about what we do on this podcast, Aubrey, is we allow people that space, I remember the first time going and sharing my story at a church somewhere, and there's this massive receiving line lined up. I thought they were coming to offer condolences to me, but they were coming to share their own story as if it was the first time they had a space to talk about it.
Wow.
And that's really what the Nothing is Wasted podcast is all about, is providing people a space to talk through this stuff, process it out loud. And sometimes as we process it out loud, this as a writer and as, a speaker, you process it out loud and it begins to start to put things in something that's a little bit more, gives a little bit more shape and form. And you're going, okay, all right. True. As you start to bounce it off of the truth, what you know to be true. And then there's very cathartic moments that happen as you process it out loud too. So, it's
so true. You can kind of go, I see God's hand in it. Oh, I see God, what you were doing there. Yeah.
You also have been walking beside Justin, Jenn's widower, as well as her kids. And, you said that you guys have been great friends through this whole process, through even the planting of renewal. And so it doesn't surprise me that that's the case, but I'm curious, as you guys are kind of walking this road together or parallel, Justin, the rest of the kids, your family, Kevin.
Yeah.
What are some things that you're learning about grief that maybe you didn't know in your previous season of grief?
Hi, friend. I know these stories on the podcast are so encouraging to hear as you listen to others who have walked through unimaginable pain and found hope in it, and they've walked through it. But I also know that how to move forward can be the question that so many of you guys who are listening to this or watching this on YouTube, you're asking that question currently as you're walking through the valley. I know when I think about my own journey after losing my wife, Amanda, I wish that I had had something practical, a guide to walk me through the pain and the process of healing, which is why we created the Pain to Purpose course. The Pain to Purpose course is truly a guide to help you remove the debris of crisis in your life and move forward with a renewed sense of victory and purpose. Hundreds have taken the course and found so much hope and healing in their own story. But I want you to listen to what Jera had to say about how the course helped her find her way out of anxiety and depression.
I came in a very low spot in my life. I was walking through depression. I was walking through a lot of anxiety. That led me to some really poor decisions in my life that got me to the place where I thought I was no longer worthy to be used by God. In the course, I learned a lot of practical tips when I'm feeling unworthy or when I'm really low. First, I learned how to label all those feelings, and then I learned to say, no, this biblical truth is that God loves me, that I am purposeful, that He put me here for a reason, and I had to put that before my unworthiness that I was feeling.
So if you're ready to take the next step in healing from whatever hurt you've walked through and want help in how to identify your pain and how to move forward, sign up now for the Pain to Purpose course by going to course.nothingiswasted.com. Again, that's course.nothingiswasted.com. You'll have access to all the course videos and everything you need to start moving from pain into purpose. So often we continue to walk around with unprocessed pain and trauma without the guidance that we actually need in order to navigate our inner world. Let Nothing is Wasted Ministries help you on the path towards healing.
Hey, Nothing is Wasted family. Are you walking through a specific valley, looking for resources to help you in your pain? I think we can all attest to the fact that there is comfort in hearing from those who have walked a similar path and have found hope and healing on the other side. That is why we have created collections of resources called Curated Pathways to help you navigate your specific pain point. With curated pathways on topics like grief, child loss, sexual betrayal, childhood trauma, widowhood, and more, we've compiled the very best resources from Nothing is Wasted all in one place that will speak directly to what you are experiencing right now. Our curated pathways will give you access to everything we've created, from past podcast episodes to bonus content and our masterclasses, live coaching, and everything in between. When you're facing a crisis, loss, or trauma, you don't have the time or energy to search for what could help you heal. You can get a taste of what our curated pathways have to offer by going to nothingiswasted.com/pathways. But if you're ready to go to the next level on your healing journey, you can access the full library of our resources, including the entire curated pathway you're looking for, by becoming a Community Plus member. For just $20 a month or $200 a year, you'll have access to the complete collection of Nothing is Wasted's curated pathways. As a Community Plus member, you'll be able to access a new curated pathway each month as our collection grows. Our team has been working very hard on this to catalog, index, organize, and distribute our library of content in a way that will be most helpful to you. We know what it is like to face pain, and we want to equip you with the tools you need to find hope and healing as you move from pain to purpose. Join Community Plus today at nothingiswasted.com/Community Plus and partner with God to take back your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really
Like
good
almost
question.
like if you're writing the louder song again in some ways, like what would
Yeah,
you put in the
what would you
new
say?
edition of that book? And
It's a great question. It's a great question. Yeah, it's been such a gift to walk with Justin, and I know he's been so blessed by Nothing is Wasted. He, like you mentioned, he went to the widowers retreat, which was such a gift, and to him, and I know I've said this to you and to our team, Davey, but for me to see Nothing is Wasted bless my best friend's widower, man, I just praise Jesus. Like, it's such a gift to my heart to know that the groundwork you've laid, Davey, the groundwork our whole team has laid, has ministered to him. Man, I mean, there's nothing like it, you know. What would I say that's different now than I would in my earlier seasons of grief? The thing that has been really interesting to me walking with Justin is he has really modeled for us how to let people walk with you. And I've learned a lot from him, even in my own grief. So this is kind of interesting, but as Jenn was dying of cancer when COVID was like in everybody's conscious, you know? And so she's a 6 on the Enneagram for our Enneagram people. So she's already a little bit anxiety, worry prone, and like a germaphobe. Like, we've all laughed at how Jenn was a germaphobe. And so during her cancer treatments and during COVID, she was just hyper vigilant about who could be in her life and who couldn't. I got to be in her inner circle, but a lot of people, she kind of was like, no, we can't hang out. No, I don't want to be around you. And some of those people have had to process that, how that made them feel and what that was. We've talked about it. But she was protective of herself, and also knowing she had cancer, knowing how vulnerable she is, she wanted to keep herself safe and her family safe. But this is gonna sound strange, but I've also said this to Justin. When Jenn died, it was like, in the movie Frozen, when I don't know if you know this reference.
Believe me,
Amy.
I know the movie.
You're a girl dad, so okay.
Well, not just that. I mean, all of our kids, they know every song to both Frozen 1 and Frozen 2 and Frozen on Broadway. That's the new craze in our house. Yes, all of it.
Okay, so you know Frozen. Yep. All right, so there's a scene at the beginning of the first Frozen where they're like, it's time to open up the gates. And for the first time ever, they're opening up the castle and they're letting people in and they're having a big party.
I thought you were going to break up the song. I could bring Cohen in right now and he could start singing.
I wish you would. I feel like that would be a blessing.
The gates.
The gates. Yes. So that's like, it's going to sound so strange, but Jenn passing allowed Justin to open up the gates. And it allowed him, he started inviting people over. He started letting people in his home. He started letting people bring him meals. He started letting people come clean his house. He started coming to things, saying yes to everything. And that was a commitment he made. We're going to say yes to all of our invitations, boys, because we have not been able to for a while. And so the question was, what's different now than what's different then? I don't totally know the answer to that, but something about watching him choose yeses and choose life, but doing it like very intentionally. Like, we are going to join in. We are going to show up. We are going to choose community, even when we don't want to. Like, and again, like, some people I think might say that's avoiding pain. It wasn't avoiding pain. It was like letting people love him in his grief, letting people love his kids in his grief. And I would say that's something like that I've had to learn. And maybe because I'm a 4 and I can go a little dark and I can go a little isolated. This goes back to what I was saying even about that girls trip, to be like, no, I will, in the midst of my heartache and how heavy and sad and lonely I feel, I'm going to choose friendship. I'm going to choose community. I'm going to show up. I'm going to go to church and raise my hands and worship Jesus, even if it's aspirational and I don't totally believe the words I'm saying right now. I'm just going to keep on choosing yes and keep choosing life. And I feel like I wouldn't have been able to express that in earlier seasons of grief, but something about watching Justin continue to let life in has ministered to me and reminded me, like, no, Obs, you can keep letting life in. This is a strange example. And I know this is going to sound weird with grief, but I think our listeners will get it. I had, normally I take the boys on one boy at a time on a trip every summer. So we kind of rotate. So like it's Eli and then it's Lincoln and then it's Nolan and we go in turns. And it was my year to take Nolan and I tried to connect it to like I try to connect to a speaking event or something. But this year I was just like, you know what, Nolan, let's just go do something fun, just us. So I took him to Disney World for a couple days. And we had this moment in the pool at Disney World where he wanted to do cannonballs. And he was like, Mom, come do a cannonball with me. And I was like, no, buddy, I don't want to. I want to just stay on the side of the pool. I want to just read my book. I want to kind of be like alone here. And then I mean, this is going to sound so weird, but it was like, I felt like God was like, get up and do a cannonball. You need to live your life. You need to take up space. You need to enjoy the moment in front of you. And so I did. I got up, I jumped in the pool. It was just some inelegant cannonball. Hopefully no one really saw me do it, but it was like, again, this kind of punctuation mark in my grief where I was like, I will do something fun. I will be in the moment. I will enjoy being with my kid. And when you're in grief, I don't think people realize how deliberate those choices have to be. It's almost like a cannonball becomes a prayer. You know what I mean? A choice to show up in community becomes an act that's like defiant and disruptive against death that just tries to steal. And there's something about that in my grief that's different than before, where I've just been like, I will not, in one sense, let death win. I will honor my pain and my heartache. Like I said, I'm a feeler. I'm going to cry and cry and cry. But then I'm also going to like choose moments to just show up and show up fully without apology, and allow that to somehow mean like, God's here, I'm letting life in again. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of been my process over the past year.
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think there's this, there's always this tension that they're concerned about when it comes to losing someone, you know, and it's this idea of like, okay, moving on, moving forward, like, how do you continue to move forward and live your life and accept, you know, what has happened, all the while grieving? Like, where do you find that tension point? You know, where do you find the ways to be able to do that? And I think that's probably one of the biggest struggles that a lot of people have, because they go, well, and they can get stuck in that. And it's like finding, how do we grieve this well? The best way my counselor said it, you know, weep well without wallowing. Like, how do we do that?
Wow.
How do we truly weep well, but not get stuck in it? And ironically, what ends up happening is I think the people that get stuck and circle that grief in the same way, right? They circle it in the same way for years and years and years and years and years, because grief is a growth journey. So we're going to circle. It's going to come back around, and it's going to hit us in these moments that we, you know, we're tender on a certain day, and it surprises us, but it's going to hit us differently, right? There's going to be something, and we've talked about this before, Aubrey. It's going to be like a staircase that's, you know, it's winding you up and kind of forward in that grief. But the ones who get stuck and circle it the same way are ironically the ones who don't actually weep well.
Wow.
They avoid weeping well. They're trying to, because it's so painful, or it's so scary, or so they're like, I can't go there. And so they refuse.
Yeah, it's too hard.
They suppress, and that ends up getting them stuck.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
So I think you're wrestling, you constantly wrestle this tension of like, no, you know what? Like, you've said this a couple times in different ways, right? I'm going to go on this girl's trip. I'm going to, like, I've got to go on this without you. And I think those are such healthy exercises. All the while, it's part of this really bitter taste of grief, you know?
That's it.
I'm curious, you know, Aubrey, we had a conversation with John Mark Comer several weeks ago. We talked about this idea of the dark night of the soul. It's something you've been studying a lot in preparation for a book that you have coming out in several months about the dark night of the soul. I wonder how this, you know, as we kind of start to close the conversation, I wonder how the your own season of the dark night of the soul has maybe overlapped or has informed even with grief journey. Explain for our listeners, you know, and they can go back and listen to our conversation with John Mark Comer too, because we went way deep, but explain kind of a high level. What is the dark night of the soul, and like, how has that overlapped in your grief journey in the season?
Yeah, dark night of the soul it's not a phrase that you'll read in scripture, but it's certainly alluded to in scripture, especially the Psalms of Lament, where we experience a sense of God's absence. God's presence feels more like absence. And anecdotally, what followers of Jesus throughout history have said is that God actually does that to us on purpose. For a number of reasons. One of those reasons is to kind of almost like I think it's Augustine who said, when you think you've understood God, the thing you've understood is not God. Like it's kind of this concept of like, oh, you think you've understood me? You think you've put me in a box? let me just explode out of that box a minute. You know what I mean? And then the other piece of the dark night is God really helping you identify like what we would call idols or what we would call attachments, things that aren't always bad things, but have for whatever reason taken the place of God on the throne of our hearts, as pastors like to say, preachers like to say. And that could be so many things. That could be a person, that could be materialism, that could certainly be more devastating addictions, drinking, pornography, numbing, self-soothing, etc. And so the experience of the dark night, it doesn't always happen in grief and pain. But I think I said on our episode with Eric, for me it was. And so here I am watching my best friend die of breast cancer, and like God was, let me rephrase that. God felt absent. And I rephrase that because we know that God is never truly absent. The promise of Scripture is that God is with us. We are never forsaken, never abandoned. And yet the feeling of God's presence, which so often brings us comfort in grief and hope in grief and sustains us in grief, just has not been there for me over the past year. And that's not been awesome. Like God knows I don't love that. Now, God and I have been through a lot together, and he knows I am not a flight risk. I am not running anywhere. But I have often felt like Jacob wrestling, like I'm staying. I'm not going to go anywhere, but I need you to show up and bless me, God. Like I cannot, this is not sustainable for me anymore to keep walking through hardship and grief without a sense of your presence. I am not made for this. I need you. And so it's been a bizarre thing to like almost show up to my quiet time each and every morning, open my scripture and just be like, okay, I'm reading, I'm journaling. Where are you, God? Where are you, God? I mean, my journal last year was literally me just saying, where are you, God? Where are you, God? Where are you, God? And, you know, one of the things that John Mark Comer said that I have found true is part of the dark night of the soul is also to be like, hey, look, we walk by faith and not by feeling. Like Abraham, even when he could not see, he still chose faith. We walk by faith and not by sight. And so it's been this weird to be honest, discouraging thing. Like I would so much rather have a sense of the presence of the Holy Spirit with me, especially in grief, than not. I think we all would. And yet, bizarrely, Davey, I see God growing my faith, increasing my capacity, helping me release any type of straining. Like I now know I cannot control God's presence. There is no, we say this all the time, but now I actually mean it. There's no formula for me to go 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, God's with me. Do you know what I mean? Like God gets to decide when God wants to show up. God gets to decide when he wants to come near. But there is a work for me to stay faithful and to believe his promises are true, even when I can't feel them, to choose faith, even when I can't see anything. And, so it's just a weird, I don't love the Dark Night of the Soul Club. I don't want every Christian to go through it. But like everything we talk about here at Nothing is Wasted, I do see God's hand in it. I find meaning in it. And I know that joy will return. Like I have no doubt joy will return. And so I'm sitting and I am waiting and I'm worshiping. Most of the time, like I said before, it's aspirationally, but I just know God's promises are true. And so I'm, okay, God, you're here. Okay, God, you're here. Okay, God, you're here. And, you know, the other thing is, Davey, there is a day when I'm going to see Jesus face to face. There is a day when I'm going to be on the other side of that veil and I'm going to see my friend. And the hope of that future promise is what I cling to. You know what I mean? And do so very intentionally in a way that I haven't had to before. It almost is like it came more naturally, and now it's like, no, I'm choosing my faith. I'm choosing to believe this story is real because I need Jesus. I need the resurrection.
That's so good. That's so good. I love thinking about parallels of relationships here on earth and in heaven. I'm like, man, I sure hope that Jenn and Amanda have been
Me
able to
too.
get coffee together, or
Yeah.
are they
Yeah.
having a conversation
I love
right now
that.
as we speak, even though time is very different there than it is here.
I
But
love that idea.
it does
I
help to
love
think
that.
about
Yeah.
that there is a continuation
It really
of
does.
relationship. I know I've said this before so many times, but Randy Alcorn's book, Heaven, was so helpful for me to think through that. Like, oh, there's continuation of relationship. It's not like this relationship is
Yeah.
final when we
Yes.
pass away. And so that's such a beautiful thing to be able to hang on to that hope, even when we don't feel the hope right now, even when it feels like God is absent, to be able to go, nope, one day,
Yeah.
one day,
Yeah, that's
I
right.
know,
That's right.
and I can hold on, and
Yep.
and it's going to feel like that.
Yeah, totally. And I do believe these light and momentary troubles are going to be nothing compared to the glory that we get to see.
Come on. So good. Whew.
I know it.
Wow. Well, Aubrey, I mean, we could probably take another 2 or 3 hours and talk about this, 'cause all the things that God's doing in you and revealing in you. And the good thing is that because you are one of the hosts of the Nothing is Wasted podcast, people will get to hear more from you on this.
I'll be
We'll
back.
keep talking about this as we go along, but I'm so glad that we got to have kind of a sacred time to set aside and go, okay, let's talk through what you've been wrestling through and how this has been for you. It's been such a
Well, I appreciate you setting the table for that. I know some of our listeners have lost their best friends, and it's a unique thing. So I'm glad to be able to kind of just bear witness to that for our people. So definitely praying for our listeners who are hurting right now. I know how it feels.
Well, where can people continue to follow along, Aubrey? I know we talk. I mean, I know we talk about this a lot, but there's some other things that you're doing. And of course, you can follow Aubrey at Aubrey Sampson. They hear this every sign off of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. But there's more things. There's other things. What else can we be a part of?
Yeah, you can definitely go to @obsamp. There are a lot of places. You go to my website, aubreysampson.com. That's where my speaking, that's where a lot of my articles that I write a column for Christianity.com. And I have something called the Louder Song Community, where once a month I gather with my Substack readers, and you can find out more about my Substack on my website or at Instagram as well. But I gather monthly on a Wednesday night with really just people like Nothing is Wasted, people who are hurting, and walking with people who are hurting. We have about an hour Zoom call, and I bring somebody on just to pour into you. Jenn's husband, Justin, kicked off the first one. My friend Catherine McNeil, who's been on the show before, she's an author and a chaplain. She'll be doing the next one with me. And really, it's just a safe space for hurting people to feel seen and poured into. So love to have you find out more about that on my website or on my Instagram @obsamp.
That's awesome. Well, Aubrey, thank you. It's been really special to be able to have this time with you. So thank you for sharing so vulnerably. Thank you for leading the way in lament and inspiring all of us to continue to bring our really difficult questions and difficult emotions to the feet of Jesus. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Davey.
So, Davey, normally after episodes, I go, wow, that was a powerful episode. I feel like I can't do that. I'll let you say it.
Okay, you ready for this? You ready? Wow. Wow.
Wow, Aubrey, you're profound.
Wow, Aubrey, you have, yes, so profound, amazing. No, it really was. And I know we say that in jest, but it really was a very powerful conversation. And I'm grateful that you shared so vulnerably with us in that. I consider that a gift. So thank you. I know we talked a little bit about the dark night of the soul, and we talked, about, in that topic when people experience that and what that looks like and what to do in that. But I'm also curious too, you're a pastor as well. And so having walked through and your own dark night of the soul, you're able to recognize it in other people. Yeah. Maybe they feel confused, disoriented, dysregulated about it. So how are we to, it's just kind of a follow-up question from our conversation, how are we to shepherd or care for others as they're experiencing their own dark night of the soul? It can be very easy to want to resolve that for them.
Right.
To answer questions, button things up. Almost in some ways I've found the tendency I've got to defend God here when someone's got a lot of really dark, difficult questions. So how do we shepherd them?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I feel like in some ways this has been the work of Nothing is Wasted for the past several, at least several years, almost a decade at this point. And this is your work and this is my work, I think. A couple things, and one of the most obvious ones is just giving people a name for this spiritual experience that's called the dark night of the soul. Do you know what I mean? Like when you can't name something, I think it's very difficult to know that it's happening, to have perspective on it, and to even experience healing from it.
So true.
And so to be able to say, oh, there is this thing that God does that's actually not separate from our formation, but part of our spiritual formation. It's documented biblically, it's documented historically, it's documented globally, Christians around the world. And so I can put it in a category, meaning I can kind of almost step away from it and examine it and go, okay, God's doing something here. Right? So that's not all of it, but I think that is a huge part. I mean, it's like when you finally get a diagnosis, you go, oh, that's what's been ailing me this whole time. Okay, now I can move forward and figure out how to take the right steps for healing.
That's good.
And I would say this, so we normalize it, right? Normalize dark nights of the soul. And then I would say, secondly, for me, at least as a pastor and a shepherd, I feel like I am encouraging people to see night faith as part of mature Christianity. And so this is now, if God is inviting you into a season of what I've been calling night faith, that means that he is inviting you to just a whole new level of maturity, intimacy, and depth in your Christian walk. And so to really encourage, shepherd, and just remind people, hey, God still loves you. God is still good. God has not changed. But this is a season because God wants you to grow in maturity.
Wow.
And that's a good invitation, as painful as it is, right?
Yeah.
And then I think some things we learned from John Mark Comer, like as that episode we had with him, which we could put in the show notes maybe, but it's this season of Dark Night of the Soul is not about more doing. It's really about rest. It's about trust. It's about waiting. And so just to remind people, hold on. I feel like my preaching right now is saying to so many people, hold on. Joy will return. Abundance will return. Provision will return. God's presence will return. Your job is to hold on. Hold on.
So good.
And
so good.
And I honestly, I feel like for so many Christians right now, that's kind of the ask. Like God is searching the land. Who is going to hold on and choose me even when it's hard, even when it's dark? And that person is going to see the goodness of God in the land of the living. So those are just some thoughts off the, and those are the things I'm reminding myself of too, right? We're always preaching to ourselves as preachers, aren't we?
Well, that's it. You know, if anybody comes up and goes, wow, that's an incredible sermon that you just preached, it's always like, well, that's because I'm living that right
I'm
now.
living it.
Like God's preaching that to me, and I begrudgingly brought that to you because this is actually more for me. And so,
right.
Yeah. And that has, that brings there's such a resonance that I have with that too, because one of the things I'm preaching on a lot is the trust journey that God took the Israelites on, and how we can superimpose that into our trust journey with him. And so Deuteronomy says, I've led you around the wilderness these 40 years to humble you and to test you. And that there are tests that God brings us through. And sometimes those tests, the way it manifests itself is it seems like God's presence is removed from us. And it's like when Moses goes to the mountain for 40 days, what are you going to do? You know?
Wow, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? So it's like when God's presence kind of gets removed, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the test that God took the Israelites through, you can actually superimpose those over the test that Jesus went through when the Spirit drove him out into the wilderness to be tested. So it's amazing to see that when we can superimpose those into our life and go, okay, these are the lessons we learned through that.
Yeah.
But really what I get to at the very end of that sermon is when you've done everything to stand. And it's exactly what you just said. Just hold on. Just like God will take care of this. Yeah. Just hold on. Stand. You need not fight this battle.
Yep.
Just
be still. He's got it. And I do think that, the graciousness of God is that you can also go, God, I actually can't stand. So you got to be my chair. You got to hold my hands. You got to pull me up. Like I cannot do it anymore. And
So
God
good.
knows that. And God's graciousness is such that His Holy Spirit empowers us to stand and keep on standing.
Wow.
I'm still standing.
Well, this is why Aubrey's writing a book about this, why it's coming
Yeah.
out at the beginning of, toward early part of 2025, spring of 2025. It's going to be super exciting because we could sit and talk about this for hours
Yeah.
because it's a very real pain point for so many of
Right.
us. And Aubrey is living it, has lived it, and is really coming from a place of this deep wrestling with the Lord. So I'm excited for people to get their hands on that book as it comes out. And grateful
Speaking
again.
of books, Davey, let's thank you for that, by the way. I'm actually very
Yeah,
excited for
absolutely.
that. We'll definitely be spreading the word, towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
But right now, we're really excited because the Nothing is Wasted book is releasing July 30th. I cannot believe
Yep.
it. Like, we are
Yep.
there. You can pre-order your copy today at nothingiswastedbook.com. And Davey said earlier, the book club's already started. Some things are in the works, but it's actually not too late for you to join and be a part of that crew, be a part of that
That's right.
team, be a part of stewarding this message and spreading the word. And so we want to invite you to all things around the book at nothingiswastedbook.com. We also hope to see you in August at
Yeah.
the book launch event, which is going to be so fun. I can't wait
That's
for
right.
it.
That's right. Well, we'd also love to invite you to follow us on Instagram. You can follow at Nothing is Wasted Ministries, at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. You can follow Aubrey at AubSamp. Follow me at Davey Blackburn. And we would love to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. You can download or stream his music anywhere music can be downloaded and streamed. And we would love for you to write a review on on Apple Podcasts. Share your story with us. Like and subscribe this on YouTube if YouTube is your choice consuming medium. If you like to watch us right here, we're excited for that too. And so next week, Aubrey, we have a conversation with Matt Chandler, which
I'm looking forward to that.
I am so excited because this conversation was very rich. Matt Chandler actually early on in my formative, early ministry years helped to shape a lot of my theology of pain and suffering
Wow.
as I watched him walk through his cancer diagnoses. And
Yep.
at the same time, I was cutting my teeth in ministry quite a bit and listening to a lot of his sermons. So I just kind of tracked that journey with him, and he helped shape for me what it looks like to follow after the Lord and be faithful, even
that's
when you're
cool.
going through difficult times. So this is going to be a really good conversation. I can't wait for you guys to listen to what he has to say about pain and suffering. So go ahead and take a listen to this little clip from my conversation with Matt Chandler.
Like to endure while gazing upon Jesus with joy is the most profound apologetic that the world will ever see. It's confusing to them. And I'm not talking about, it's important to note, I'm not talking about rah-rah spirit sprinkle nonsense.
Right.
Like a deep joy based on the knowledge that Christ is on his throne, that I am more than this life, and that, as Paul said, and because this is what Paul has in view when he says, I consider these light and momentary troubles not worthy to be compared to future glory.
Right.
He sees Christ ascended. He sees a remade heaven and earth. He sees all things made new. He sees no remembrance of former things. He sees, and he says, all the prison, all the suffering, all the death, all the hardship are not worthy to be compared to future glory. Paul, in essence, is going, 10,000 years from now, all of this is going to look so tiny, so small, so insignificant. It doesn't take away from the pain now. And Paul doesn't shrink back from the hurt of now. But he's saying when we're gazing upon Jesus and we're remembering our inheritance, which is new heaven, new earth, resurrected body, reigning and ruling alongside King Jesus in a physical new place with physical bodies that cannot perish.
Yeah.
And then we enter into the triune love of God. When we're oriented around that, then even in our suffering, we can, like the disciples, leave rejoicing that we were able to suffer for the sake of the Lamb, which is in Acts, right? And so that's the orientation. And I think the church has not done a good job of painting what that future glory is.
Right.
And so we've become almost Gnostics again. I mean, it's a weird moment where there's no real hope in future glory, that even the church wants it all here and now and has lost sight that that's not the way this is going to work.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.